Penelope's heart moved quietly among the tall shelves of the bookstore, her fingers gently tracing the spines of newly arrived novels. The scent of fresh paper and brewing coffee filled the little shop nestled on a lively city street, a comforting mix that made this place feel like a refuge. She wore a soft smile, though her chest fluttered with a familiar hope tinged with something sharper, an unspoken wish to be seen beyond the clerk's counter. The noon light filtered through wide windows, dappling the worn wooden floor as customers milled past, their conversations blending into a gentle hum. Across the shop's entrance, a tall woman stepped in, her tailored blazer crisp and her hair styled with exacting precision. There was an unmistakable air of authority about her, the kind that spoke of stages, bright lights, and the sharp-eyed attention of fans. This was Vivian Reed, the celebrated author whose sharp wit and biting remarks were as famous as her bestsellers. She carried herself with a confidence that bordered on imperious, making the quiet bookstore seem smaller in her presence. Penelope spotted Vivian approaching the signing table in the back of the shop, where a small crowd had begun to gather, eager for a glimpse of the author. Tentatively, Penelope stepped forward, clutching a clean copy of Vivian's latest book in her hands, and offered, "If you'd like, I can help you set up or get you something to drink." Vivian's gaze flicked over Penelope without acknowledgement. She swept past the offer as if it were air, her sharp heels clicking on the floor, commandingly veering toward the event space as murmurs followed behind her. The cold dismissal sliced through Penelope's quiet optimism, and she hesitated, self-conscious and invisible in a place she so deeply loved. Vivian Reed's heels clicked sharply across the wooden floor as she made her way to the signing table, her body radiating commanding confidence. Penelope stood frozen a few feet behind, clutching the book a little tighter, the sting of dismissal twisting deeper. The normal soundtrack of pages turning and murmured conversations seemed to fade, replaced by the sharp edge of Vivian's indifference. Penelope's offer to help had been casually brushed aside, as if she were part of the furniture, not a person. The thought knotted her stomach. Seconds later, Vivian turned back with a slight smirk, loud enough for the small crowd gathering but pointedly directed at Penelope. "I don't need assistance from the help," she said, voice smooth yet dripping with condescension. "Make sure everything's ready on your own, cheaply dressed assistant." The phrase cut like a knife, a deliberate jab at Penelope's simple cardigan and worn jeans. A few patrons glanced sharply, their expressions flickering with surprise and discomfort. Some shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. The store owner, Mr. Collins, who had been busily arranging chairs nearby, shot Penelope an apologetic look but said nothing. Penelope swallowed hard, burning with embarrassment. She forced herself to smile, a faint quiver of resistance in an ocean of invisibility, and muttered, "Of course." She stepped back and began straightening the table with trembling hands. Each movement felt uneven, as though the world had tilted just enough to unbalance her. Visitors glanced from Vivian's poised figure to Penelope's quiet presence, the contrast laying bare. The author's sharp demeanor made Penelope's once hopeful expression dim into near invisibility. Some customers exchanged whispered remarks. "Did you hear that? She's really harsh. I wonder if Penelope did something wrong?" A middle-aged woman, browsing nearby, gave Penelope a quick, encouraging nod, but the unfamiliar kindness only made Penelope's humiliation feel heavier. She retreated to a corner behind a rack of poetry books, trying desperately to disappear among the pages and quiet. But Vivian was relentless. Across the room, her voice rose slightly, clear and bold enough to draw the attention of the crowd. "You see that girl? The one who keeps trying to help but clearly doesn't belong here? She doesn't understand the world she serves, the stories she arranges. I doubt she's even read a line from my books. I wouldn't want my words handled by anyone so irrelevant." The word irrelevant hung in the air, stinging with deliberate cruelty. Murmurs rippled through the listeners. The customer's eyes flicked to Penelope again, scrutinizing her as if trying to catch some hidden truth beneath her modest clothes and quiet demeanor. The store felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the walls themselves pressed down on her. Penelope's breath hitched. The world around her blurred. For a moment, she considered fleeing, leaving the bookstore, escaping this moment of sharp shame. Her pulse hammered as conflicted emotions battled within: frustration, sadness, disbelief. Her unspoken hope was crumbling beneath Vivian's glare and the crowd's silent judgment. She leaned against the bookshelf, seeking support from the worn wood. The texture grounded her briefly, but Vivian's words echoed, relentless. The owner appeared beside her, his usual warm expression replaced by uncomfortable hesitance. "Penelope. I'm sorry. Perhaps we should give her space." His voice was low, almost apologetic. Penelope shook her head slowly, the tightening around her chest making it hard to breathe. "It's okay," she whispered. She trailed off, unable to explain the ache of being dismissed, made invisible amid a place that usually felt like home. But Vivian wasn't done. She raised her voice again, this time commanding, "Don't let her fool you. She belongs nowhere near the real literary world. She's just a distraction." The words felt like a spotlight turning the crowd's attention mercilessly back to Penelope. The customers shifted awkwardly, the hum of the store barely concealing a growing tension. Some averted their gazes, others, mostly regulars, exchanged looks that blended sympathy with discomfort. No one spoke openly, but Penelope could feel the weight of their eyes. It was as if her very presence suddenly invited judgment and scorn. Penelope's cheeks burned. She forced herself to take a small step forward, as though to explain, defend, or perhaps simply to reclaim some fragment of dignity. "I love books," she said quietly but firmly, barely audible over the murmurs. "I've read your work, Vivian." Her voice faltered. "And I'm proud to be part of this bookstore. It's more than a job to me." The room fell into a tentative silence. Some customers glanced back at Vivian, awaiting her reaction. Vivian's lips curled into a sharp smile, tight and sarcastic. "How charming," she said, voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "But passion doesn't equate to talent or status. Remember that." Her eyes locked onto Penelope's, filled with a challenge rather than warmth. That challenge sent a conflicting surge through Penelope, not weakness, but a flicker of determination she had worked hard to suppress. Yet, acknowledging that fire did little to halt the shame pulled tight around her, the humiliation was suffocating. Eventually, Penelope excused herself quietly, weaving through the aisles as the murmurs resumed. She slipped out the back door into the soft afternoon light, escaping into the city street that buzzed with indifferent energy. Outside, the cool air brushed her flushed face, bringing a calm she hadn't felt inside the store. Penelope dialed her closest friend, Chloe, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chloe, I feel like I don't belong anywhere today," she confessed. "I thought working here would be different." Chloe's voice was soft, full of kindness and unwavering support. "Penelope, you belong because you care. Don't let one person's arrogance define you. You're stronger than that." Penelope forced a small smile, tucking the phone away. But even as she took steps to distance herself from the hurt, a shadow loomed. Vivian's words were not just casual cruelty, they were a deliberate attempt to humiliate her, to mark her as irrelevant in front of everyone. And the worst part was, no one stopped it. Back inside, the crowd's attention lingered on Penelope's retreating figure. And Vivian, triumphant, began signing books with a flourish, basking in the admiration her name commanded. The room filled with whispers and sideways glances, the silence of complicity hanging heavy in the air. Penelope's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of invisibility threatened to swallow her whole. The antagonist had won this round, but beneath the surface, an ember sparked. What would you do if you were in Penelope's shoes, standing alone while everyone is watching and waiting for you to break? Penelope stood just inside the entrance of the bookstore, the door closing softly behind her as the bustling city whispered around her. Her footsteps carried her slowly back toward the signing area, the copy of Vivian Reed's latest novel still clutched in her hands. She felt the eyes of the crowd upon her, the anticipatory, skeptical gaze that seemed to say, "This is the girl who doesn't belong here." Her heart pounded uncertainly, a rhythm both alarming and emboldening. The chatter around Vivian's signing table had subsided momentarily, the crowd shifting expectantly. Penelope knew the author's condescending remarks hung heavily in the air. The spectators had tasted the sharpness of Vivian's disdain. Now the room awaited the next act, hungry for entertainment, if not intrigue. Penelope took a deep breath, steadying herself against the swirl of public scrutiny, and stepped forward, her voice clear but tentative. "Before you begin signing," Penelope said, lifting the book slightly so the cover caught the soft rays of the afternoon sun, "I'd like to share a passage I find particularly moving." There was a flicker of surprise in some eyes, followed by silence as the room leaned in. Vivian's eyes narrowed, a subtle edge of irritation crossing her features, but Penelope pressed on. Opening the book, Penelope read aloud smoothly, the cadence of her voice weaving through the words with genuine care. "In the spaces between despair and hope, we find the stories that bind us, threads of courage woven through the fabric of hardship." Her gaze lifted to meet the crowd's, steadying, assured. The room held its breath for a moment before Penelope continued, "This passage always struck me because it speaks to resilience, a theme your work embraces, Ms. Reed. But often, it feels like the quiet strength behind the stories is overlooked. The readers, the helpers, those who carry the weight of words into the world." The customers exchanged glances, a murmur of approval rippling through the space. Some nodded, others smiled warmly, surprised by Penelope's insightful interpretation. Even Mr. Collins, the store owner, leaned forward, eyes bright. Vivian's lips tightened into a thin line. Her casual smirk faded, replaced by a glance of disbelief. Penelope's words pierced the carefully managed image of aloof superiority she projected. Encouraged, Penelope turned a few pages and quoted another passage, deftly illuminating the deeper layers of the novel's themes. Her voice grew stronger as she wove connections between the author's words and their impact on readers. The group listened intently, captivated by the unexpected depth Penelope brought to a story they thought they knew. The crowd's shifting energy was palpable. Soft applause began, tentative at first, then building steadily. "Bravo," a woman murmured, clapping gently. Others joined in, some calling out, "Well said," and "Thank you for sharing that." Vivian's expression tightened further. The poised author who had brushed Penelope aside now seemed unsettled. Her gaze flickered across the room, briefly catching the amused smiles of some patrons who seemed to silently question her earlier condescension. When Penelope finished, she closed the book softly and smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet confidence born of passion, not vanity. "I love these stories," she said. "And I believe every reader and every helper in this space contributes to their life and meaning." For a heartbeat, the space hummed with surprise and newfound respect. Vivian's flawless composure cracked slightly, her voice cooler now, a forced politeness dripping through her words. "Well, it appears you're more learned than you appear, Penelope Hart." The crowd shifted again, sensing the unspoken challenge in her tone. Penelope met the look steadily. "Perhaps there's more to every person in this bookstore than just appearances," she responded softly, voice steady and clear. The room erupted into applause, genuine and warm, reverberating through the shop's aisles and shelves. The mysterious helper, so long ignored, had unveiled her knowledge and voice. For many, it was a revelation, the kind that unsettles established roles and expectations. A quiet chuckle escaped from a young man near the back. "Looks like the student is teaching the master something new," he said with a grin, earning nods and warm laughter from others. The atmosphere transformed from discomfort and judgment to camaraderie and respect, the tension melting into something lighter, a shift born of authenticity. Mr. Collins approached Penelope, a proud smile breaking his usually reserved demeanor. "That was brilliant," he said. "You've given me an idea for next month's event." Vivian stood at her table, staring down at the novel before her. Her earlier confidence seemed diminished, her carefully guarded arrogance replaced by a flicker of self-awareness. The crowd's quiet murmurs of appreciation for Penelope's insights left her isolated despite her fame. Penelope glanced around, overwhelmed by the unexpected surge of support. Her cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and relief. In that moment, the store felt expansive again, a place where every story mattered, and everyone had a voice. The crowd now buzzed with renewed energy. People approached Penelope, eager to thank her for her thoughts and ask questions about her favorite books. The woman who had been nearly invisible an hour before had become a center of attention, a sudden star born not from celebrity but from genuine love and understanding. Vivian gathered her signed copies, her smile tight and curt. She looked at Penelope once more, eyes measuring, but the spark of superiority was missing. That evening, as the store began to clear, the author quietly collected her belongings and left without the triumphant flourish she had arrived with. Penelope watched her go, feeling a mixture of compassion and quiet satisfaction. She had not only reclaimed her place but had done so with grace, a lesson in resilience and quiet power. The store was alive again, filled with clients chatting and laughing, turned from an arena of humiliation into a community of connection. Penelope's heart swelled with gratitude, the weight of invisibility lifting at last. Later, as the last customer departed, Mr. Collins approached Penelope with a surprising invitation. "We'd love for you to host a reading next weekend. Your passion deserves this stage." His smile was warm, sincere. Penelope's smile blossomed in return, the unspoken promise of new beginnings shimmering in her eyes. Her moment had arrived, not as a shadow behind a famous name, but as herself. She looked around the cozy bookstore, breathing in the scent of paper and possibility, ready to step forward, finally seen. Later that evening, after the bookstore had closed and the last footsteps faded from the worn wooden floor, Penelope sat alone behind the counter. The soft glow of a desk lamp cast pools of warm light over scattered books and her neatly kept notebook, stained with scribbled thoughts and ideas. The shop's quiet wrapped around her like a familiar shawl, steady and comforting after the emotional storm of the afternoon. She could still feel the echoes of the earlier confrontation, but beneath it, unexpected embers of affirmation had begun to kindle. Penelope's fingers toyed with the spine of the copy of Vivian Reed's book she'd held so tightly. She remembered why, despite the humble cardigan and jeans she often wore at work, this store was more than a job for her. It was her link to a dream she held close, even when hope sometimes faltered. She was more than a bookstore helper, she was an aspiring writer herself, quietly weaving her own stories during the scattered moments life allowed. Her path to this place had been winding and unglamorous. Raised in a small suburban town, Penelope's love for books began as an escape from a world that felt too loud and uncertain. She devoured novels by the dozen, finding solace and strength within the pages. The city's vibrant literary scene had always beckoned to her, promising stories not only to read but to live. But the harsh realities of survival often demanded more immediate attention than aspirations, a balancing act she knew all too well. She'd traveled between jobs, barista, bookstore clerk, library attendant, all while filling her worn journal with bits of stories and poems. The indie bookstore offered the perfect blend of work and inspiration, a place to breathe among shelves brimming with ideas, to connect with readers, and to nurture a quiet hope for something more. Penelope never cared much for flashy attire or social status. Her simple clothes reflected a deeper focus on substance rather than appearance. Her modest, unpretentious look often led others to underestimate her. She learned early that true knowledge and passion rarely screamed for attention. Instead, they settled in quietly, growing roots over time, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Her recent encounter with Vivian had shaken her world, but also crystallized something she had long suspected, that surface judgments could be shattered by genuine understanding and courage to speak up. Vivian's sharpness and dismissiveness had been a challenge, but what she hadn't anticipated was Penelope's deep connection to literature and her readiness to illuminate it for all who would listen. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mr. Collins stepped inside, his usual calm demeanor softened by a sincere smile. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said gently. I just wanted to thank you, Penelope. Today, you gave this place something special. And there's something more I'd like to discuss. Penelope looked up, her eyes bright despite the fatigue. Thank you, she replied softly. I never imagined any of this possible. He gestured toward the small event space nearby. We'd like you to host a special reading here next weekend. Your voice deserves to be heard by more than just us. Her breath caught. A reading? Me? Absolutely, he said firmly. Your passion and insight today reminded me how powerful authentic voices can be. This community would benefit from hearing yours. For a moment, Penelope caught her own reflection in the glass behind the counter, the simple woman who had once felt invisible now holding a spark that could kindle real change. This was not just an opportunity, it was an affirmation of everything she valued. That means more than I can say, she murmured, a smile curving her lips. I'd be honored. As Mr. Collins left her to prepare for the upcoming event, Penelope allowed herself to reflect on her journey. The path that had brought her from small-town libraries to this city corner was no accident. Each whispered rejection, every unnoticed gesture, had taught her patience, resilience, and the quiet power of perseverance. She understood now that true belonging was not about outward approval but the courage to claim her space regardless. Penelope reached for her journal and began to write, her pen flowing with renewed purpose. She chronicled the afternoon's moments, the sting of neglect, the flicker of defiance when she shared her insights, and ultimately the surprise when others saw her for who she truly was. Her handwriting grew bolder, mirroring the confidence blossoming inside. She thought of the many readers who wandered the aisles, each with their own stories, their own invisible parts waiting to be recognized. The bookstore was not just a building filled with books, it was a gathering place for stories, hopes, and dreams, fragile yet tenacious. Penelope folded her notebook closed and looked toward the window, the city's lights beginning to twinkle like distant stars. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to write her story, not just on paper but in life. In that quiet moment, she realized how far she had come. Vivian Reed's sharp rebuke had been less a defeat and more an unexpected catalyst, challenging Penelope to step fully into her own light. She smiled, ready for the next chapter, knowing the journey ahead was hers to write. The following days in the bookstore buzzed with an energy that felt both thrilling and unfamiliar to Penelope. Word had quickly spread about her unexpected shining moment during Vivian Reed's signing event, and regular customers kept stopping by to offer congratulations and encouragement. The cozy space, once a quiet refuge, now hummed with a gentle pulse of possibility. Penelope could almost feel the walls leaning in, as if the bookshelves themselves were eager to witness this new chapter in her story. Meanwhile, news of the encounter had slipped beyond the store's walls. On social media, a few patrons had shared their impressions of Vivian's dismissive behavior and Penelope's poised, insightful response. The posts attracted attention, sparking conversations about humility, respect, and the often unseen people who keep the literary world alive behind the scenes. Comments ranged from supportive to contemplative, with many readers voicing admiration for Penelope's courage and graciousness. Vivian Reed, meanwhile, found herself navigating unexpected fallout. The usually unshakable author became quieter at events, her trademark sharpness softened by the persistent whispers about her dismissive treatment of Penelope. Invitations for interviews dwindled, replaced by polite but measured requests. The sharp edges she wielded with ease now looked more like cracks. Behind the scenes, some of her longtime supporters advised a change in tone, cautioning that reputation weighed heavily in ways she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Vivian stopped by the bookstore, not for a signing or fanfare, but to speak with Mr. Collins. From a distance, Penelope observed the conversation. Vivian's usual confident stride had been replaced by a thoughtful hesitancy. Later, Mr. Collins shared that Vivian expressed regret for her earlier conduct and hoped to find a way to acknowledge Penelope's talent and spirit. While no grand public apology was made, the quiet gesture suggested some measure of reflection. The bookstore spotlight soon shifted fully to Penelope. The reading event Mr. Collins had proposed grew into a small community gathering, with announcements posted both in the store and online. The room was arranged with extra chairs, the shelves around festooned with fairy lights that cast a soft glow over the assembled crowd. Among the attendees were longtime patrons, curious newcomers, and even a few local authors eager to support the fresh voice emerging. As Penelope took the small stage behind the counter, the familiar scent of paper and ink seemed to cradle her confidence. The room's gentle hush welcomed her, a collective nod of encouragement. She opened her well-worn journal and began to read selections of her writing, poems and short stories that wove threads of hope, resilience, and the quiet battles fought in everyday lives. Her voice carried the vivid imagery of city streets bathed in rain, of whispered dreams beneath street lamps, of characters who struggled and triumphed in silence. The audience leaned in, captivated not only by the words but by the sincerity and warmth that poured from each phrase. There was an unmistakable intimacy in the space, a connection born of shared humanity and authentic expression. When she finished, applause filled the room, genuine and heartfelt. Hands reached out to congratulate her, to share stories of their own literary journeys, to exchange book recommendations. Penelope's cheeks flushed with joy and a sense of belonging unlike any she had known before. Mr. Collins approached with a broad smile. "You've inspired us all," he said. "This is just the beginning." Penelope nodded, her heart swelling. The bookstore had become more than a workplace. It was a community, a platform, a home. Back in the quiet hours after the event, Penelope reflected on the road traveled. She realized that being overlooked before had built within her a resilience, a quiet wellspring of strength that powered her steadfast spirit. Vivian's condescension had threatened to diminish her, but the moment she chose to step forward had transformed not only her own narrative but the story of the people around her. Word spread with a different tone now. Penelope was no longer the unnoticed helper, she was a voice worth hearing, a presence that brought light and meaning to the place she loved. Her future stretched before her, not defined by status or appearance, but by the passion and talent that had always been hers. As for Vivian, the changes in her demeanor eventually softened the sharp edges that had isolated her. While the road to repair was ongoing and imperfect, the catalyst for reflection had been set in motion. There was a quiet lesson in humility that the author now carried, a reminder that respect and kindness could enrich as much as sharp wit. One afternoon, a small package arrived for Penelope at the bookstore. Inside was a handwritten note from Vivian, simple and sincere. "Thank you for reminding me that greatness is found not only in words on a page but in the courage to share them. Wishing you all the best on your journey. Vivian Reed." Penelope's fingers trembled as she held the note, a symbol of closure and new beginnings. The bookstore thrummed softly around her, every corner alive with stories waiting to be told. She smiled, ready to write her own story in full, embracing the unexpected turns that had brought her here. What about you? How would you respond if faced with dismissal or invisibility? Would you step forward as Penelope did or retreat into silence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of resilience and courage. See you in our next story.